The Recovery Task Force for March 24th, 2023 will convene. If we could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Right behind you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. I think there's a couple of new people here. Bill, if you'd want to introduce yourself, everybody else obviously knows. And then John.
Yeah, and push the button
All right.
when it's green.
I'm Bill Veach. I'm town councilor with the town of Fort Myers Beach.
I'm John McLean from the village of Estero. I'm vice mayor now and up for voting for mayor here April 5th when we reconvene our new council. We'll have four new members. So it'll be a challenge to get us going. So good to be here.
Thank you both for joining us. I appreciate your commitment to this. It's a long road that we all have in front of us. I look forward to everyone obviously working together collaboratively and trying to do the best we can to help our community obviously recover as quick as we can. I understand everyone's going through an awful lot. And I appreciate everyone's advocacy as you're all working real hard for your communities up in Tallahassee, and Washington's around the corner. So with that in mind, if anyone's had an opportunity to look at the minutes, any questions, any deletions, any additions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Second.
I have a motion, a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Go to the, obviously, the administrative item review and recover task force administrative roles on the table.
All right. So for some of the items from we've been emailing about, and I will use the button. If you are needing to have an alternate to have representation from your jurisdiction or entity, if you can please just email us who your alternate is, just for how the Recovery Task Force was established. For elected officials, your alternate also needs to be an elected official. So please email info@resilientlead.org who your alternate is, and then we will have them ratified and so that they can come in your place if needed. For the undersheriff and for the chief, similar individuals with your titles as well can be utilized as your alternate. We are looking to bring this meeting on the road and visit your various locations. So if you would like to host a future Recovery Task Force meeting, please let us know at the same email, and we will put that on the calendar. Just looking for a space similar to this that we all can meet and have room for any public participation. And additionally, if you have any emergent issues that you would like to have addressed by the Recovery Task Force, please let us know about at least 3 days ahead of time so that we can have it added to the agenda and do any research that is needed regarding the issue. So that is going to be a revolving, and it's something that we're going to talk about later today, but things are going to pop up. If you'd like to bring them to the task force and have them added to the agenda, please just let us know 3 business days ahead of time, and we will do that. Any questions related to these items? Terry?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We are a week out from On the Table. That is our county-wide community dialogue process that was set prior to the hurricane itself and then rescheduled before the Recovery Task Force had formed. But we're adopting that platform as a broad reach for public engagement that's required for a number of the streams of funding that we will be seeking or deploying throughout the county. That is March 30th. And what we're asking specifically is for each of your jurisdictions to identify a point of contact who can then work with our Director of Communications, Noel Casagrande, to be able to organize the tables here. So for instance, 8 a.m. next Thursday, I'll be hosting an On the Table here, about 50 seats. Tables will be providing breakfast for general public who would like to come and share their perspectives on their experience with the hurricane and their view for how we rebuild and contribute to the priorities that have been set forth by the task force. So it's a fairly easy lift. The registration is on the table, swfl.com, to be able to sign up, and then either as a public table or private table. So I'll send around a sign-up list. If you could note who your point of contact would be, a liaison for Noel Casagrande to work with. And any questions about on the table? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Terry. I appreciate it. Since the last recovery task force, all the branches have met, they've discussed their priorities, and obviously engaging in the community. This morning, I thought it would be more than appropriate to talk about the grant that we obviously received from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was announced at $1.1 billion. It's going to take some time, obviously, for the registry to be done and actually an official letter. Having talked to the administration, it looks like it'll be about 60 days before we actually receive that actual letter. So we do have time, obviously, and we have an opportunity to take advantage of the time and make sure that we put together the best plan. It obviously goes towards housing, economic development, and infrastructure, primarily to low and moderate income communities. There's a lot of flexibility. Obviously, Hagerty has demonstrated in the past on just exactly how we're able to be flexible. This isn't the end all and be all, but it certainly is another brick in our foundation as we rebuild for Lee County. This works very well with the hazard mitigation grant, which we are receiving $335 million. We'll have the opportunity to utilize that grant in some of the matching funds that are necessary. So it's really important that we recognize just the continued opportunities in our advocacy together, and we are working together as one. We need everyone to come back stronger than ever, and our hope and goal is that we do that and we achieve that through this engagement, and can't thank you all enough for your participation. Today, we're basically going to go over the understanding of what a community developed block grant is and really the impact to our community. We'll have an initial discussion on the priorities of these funds. We'll identify some of the limitations for the funds. And we just thought it would be really helpful, since most of us don't really know much about what are the parameters, how do we utilize these funds in the most efficient way, and obviously the creativity that has done in the past. So we thought it would only be appropriate to have someone from the Hagerty team that obviously has worked in that silo before. We're blessed to have a former HUD Deputy Assistant Secretary here to obviously guide us through and give us an education on what this is all about. So with that in mind, I'll obviously turn the floor back over to Tanya. You can introduce your guest.
Sounds good. Hi, guys. So we're going to be doing a kind of CDBGDR. You'll all be able to say the acronym as fast as we do by probably in like 2 or 3 months. So we're going to do like kind of a 101 of CDBGDR, but then there are some couple questions that we have for you all, getting your initial input. And the county will be engaging this group and providing updates as we go related to these fundings as we go through the action plan. And I'm going to introduce Stan Gamont. He used to lead this portion of HUD doing CDBGDR. So I'll turn it on over to him to discuss the program.
Thank you, Tanya. Again, Stan Gamont. I'm Senior Advisor for Community Recovery with Hagerty. Been with the firm now for about 3.5 years. And very happy to be here today in Fort Myers to be able to talk about something that I've spent a lot of time working on over the past several decades, which is the Community Development Block Grant Program, and specifically the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery component. During my time with HUD, the last 11 years I was there, as responsible for the CDBG program, all components of it, as the director of the Office of Block Grant Assistance. So I ran it on a day-to-day basis, and the last 3 years until I left in 2019. I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Grant Programs, and this remained part of my portfolio. So 11 years experience directly managing these funds. So what I'd like to do first is start with CDBG DR in its context. So Congress has used this mechanism to fund disaster recovery for 30 years, but most of the action on it has occurred since 2001. And since that point in time, about $100 billion has been appropriated by Congress for the purpose of long-term disaster recovery through this initiative. As we kind of look over things, 1.1 billion is an awfully large allocation under this program. When we look at it, you can look at it from the perspective, it's the 3 comma club, over $1 billion. There's only a limited number of jurisdictions who have received that kind of funding for a singular event. 6 states: California, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Jersey, New York, and Texas. 2 territories, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, both after Maria and Irma about 5.5 years ago. 1 local government, New York City, after Hurricane Sandy in 2012. And 1 special purpose entity, the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, and that was for redevelopment of the World Trade Center site after the attacks of September 11, 2001. So one thing to note there are no counties on that list. So you're in new territory for Lee County as a direct grantee at this kind of level. For the most part, counties have received lower levels of funding where they've been funded directly in the past. So what we can do is kind of pick and choose and look at what these other jurisdictions have done at this level of funding, for what works, what doesn't work, and use those things as guidance as we go forward. As Commissioner Ruane indicated, there is flexibility associated with the program, and the idea is to come up with ideas, figure out how we can make them work within this framework. And if we don't think it works immediately, there are opportunities to approach HUD to get additional flexibility in the use of those dollars. So with that, go to the next slide. So I want to talk about CDBG DR by the numbers. So 2 things kind of control this. One is the language of the appropriation by which Congress makes the money available. First thing they do is they say, okay, we're going to place this within the framework of the basic CDBG program, and then we're going to add some additional requirements. And within that language, they will put various provisions in there. And some of the things you see on this slide actually arise from the appropriation language. Some of the other provisions you see here arise from the Federal Register notice that HUD is directed to put out to implement this program. It is not a permanent program, so there are no standing rules. HUD reissues rules every time there is an appropriation for these funds. And so we look to that Federal Register notice as sort of the governing document for the pot of money that you've got. But as we look at this, first thing to always keep in mind is that there is an overall low and moderate benefit objective associated with these dollars. Statute says that 70% of the funds must be expended is the key word there, for activities that benefit low and moderate income persons. That is potentially waivable, but it's a high bar to do that. You would have to do a pretty thorough analysis as to why that can't be achieved within the structure that you've got or within the communities that you've got. So again, potentially waivable, but HUD will question that pretty thoroughly. John?
Stan, how do you define the low mod people?
Great question. So this is a standard for the CDBG program. For a lot of other programs of HUD, it's defined at 80% of area median income for household size.
Just to interject real quick, all of you within your packets have a map that outlines the areas that are identified as low to moderate income areas by HUD. This is more looking at infrastructure. For housing, it's going to be determined at the individual family household level. but just as Stan speaking,
Yeah.
just for reference.
So HUD issues that information and updates it every year. Information is available on the HUD website as to, what that looks like, various jurisdictions across the country, the numbers vary. But again, it's by household size. And so we can also look, as Tanya notes, at the map. We can look at census data to determine whether areas are low and moderate income or not. And then when you're doing activities that didn't benefit an individual, you're looking at that household income. So that's one thing, one large construct to keep in mind as you're considering the construction of your program set here for the use of the dollars is anything you can do to spend a dollar that works for your 70%, do it. Because the flip side is it saves you flexibility, because there are two other objectives of the program, national objectives of the program. One is to eliminate slums and blighting condition, and the other is to address imminent threat and urgent need. What you want to do is spend as much as you can, where you can, for low and moderate income, so that you preserve your flexibility on the flip side, on the 30%, so that you can deploy that 30% for activities that aren't going to meet a low and moderate income benefit, but are nonetheless critical to your recovery program. So anything you can do for low mod, do it. Save your flexibility for the things that aren't going to meet it under any circumstance. The next criteria to think about, and I think it's going to be moot in this issue, is that HUD defines most impacted and distressed areas. Really, this works for states that receive these dollars, where they say put the money into particular jurisdictions because they are, frankly, the ones that earned it the hard way. They suffered the most damage. There were some instances many years ago where some states tried to move money away from the areas that had been impacted, that's place of landfall, for example. And so the concept HUD developed was the idea of most impacted and distressed, and said you would have to spend 80% of your money in those jurisdictions. In this instance, I believe that the whole county will be declared to be the mid area. So there will be flexibility to spend the entirety of the amount anywhere in the county. But again, keeping in mind, you've got the overall low and moderate benefit criteria to meet. The appropriation language added money for mitigation funding. So HUD determined what the unmet needs were based on an analysis of FEMA and SBA data, looking at 3 different criteria based on housing, infrastructure, and economic revitalization need, come up with an unmet needs estimate using a formula and a methodology that frankly has been pretty consistent over about 15 years. And then the statute said, when you determine that, add 15% for mitigation specific activities. That comes up to 144 million. So of that 1.1 billion, 963 million is considered to be unmet need money. 144 million is considered to be mitigation money. And so we've got those two pieces working together. They do overlap to a degree, but we're going to have to track the expenditure for mitigation purposes, and it shouldn't be hard given to meet that threshold, given the desire to focus on match for the HMGP program. Administrative funding. Again, statute says you can take a slice of this grant for general administrative cost, and that would be 5% of the total. So that would come up to roughly $55 million that would be there to serve as general administrative funds over the life of the grant. HUD in its Federal Register notice is likely to say, we would like to see this done in 6 years. And everybody would like to see it done in 6 years. The reality is these grants go on for beyond that. And so you need to manage that 5% very carefully, not just for 6 years, but probably 8 to 10 years to ensure that you have the money available down the road to continue the administration beyond 6 years. HUD offers the opportunity to extend the 6-year period. It's an administrative deadline established by HUD, so they can move that at their discretion, and they always do. They've never move to truncate anybody's funding for going beyond a 6-year window. But need to keep an eye on that expenditure so that you have money over the long haul. Activity delivery cost. What I always do is describe that as a cost you would not incur, but for the specific activity you are carrying out. So if you are doing water and sewer projects, you have architectural and engineering costs associated with that specific project, maybe permitting costs, various insurance and financing costs, all kinds of things may be wrapped up in that particular project. Those costs are not general admin costs. They're considered project activity delivery costs, and they are chargeable to the activity. They're considered to be part of it, not separate as an administrative cost. So you get this activity delivery cost, and it is bounded by some federal requirements applicable to all grants, where those costs must be necessary and reasonable to the project you're carrying out. Planning costs. The way HUD handles planning is that they permit up to 15% of the total grant for planning, but honestly, nobody really ever goes close to that. It would be hard to fathom a set of planning activities that will go anywhere near that cap, but you have flexibility to fund various things to help you decide what that path forward should look like and how to get there, frankly. So you do have that flexibility there as well. At this point, that was a lot of information. Any questions with regard to those items?
So thank you very much. Just if you can go into a little bit more detail on the infrastructure costs and the opportunities are there. I mean, we have an awful lot of needs throughout the county on not only repair and mitigation, but we have septic to sewer, we have water quality projects. So transportation, just trying to understand the infrastructure side of it.
Sure. So we've got some slides up here now where we go into the eligible activities discussion. And let me just jump over there to the top right, which is public facilities and infrastructure. Many of you have worked with CDBG funding on an annual basis at the local level to implement various projects. If you've done that or had that experience in the past, you understand there is a broad eligibility with regard to the types of public facilities and infrastructure you can fund with these dollars. Just put out a few of those options: water, sewer, flood drainage, streets, bridges, recreational facilities. All sorts of things can be funded as a public facility infrastructure project. And so as we think about that, my understanding is that the state has already offered and will pay for the match necessary on the various FEMA-funded, permanent repairs on the category C to G, and that's a huge break because now it gives you that money to move to other purposes, which would include the FEMA HMGP grant, where it's a 25% match. So that is a great bonus for you. So you can do those. Use the CDBG DR as a match to those to the HMGP dollars. You can frankly use that CDBG DR funding as match to other federal programs as well, if in fact they require that match at the state or local level. So it gives you that flexibility. That's a standard provision of the CDBG program, and it does help a lot of communities in the post-disaster recovery effort. The one thing I would say here is that you want to try and figure this out sooner than later with regard to what projects you're going to assist in that manner, and begin to get that money online and get those funding streams working together, because there are certain requirements that apply to CDBG DR that would not apply to some of the FEMA funding. Most notably, Davis-Bacon wage rates, prevailing wage rates that go with those funds. So not applicable to FEMA, but applicable to HUD. So you need to account for that early in the process so that down the line, you don't have a mismatch where the project is proceeded and now you've got to go backwards and do things because it just adds to administrative cost. The other thing to make sure that gets done on the front end is that the environmental review is fully comprehensive of all the funding going into the project. Again, you don't want to have to go backwards and try and redo an environmental review, because frankly, it's difficult. Once you start putting shovels in the ground, you have what's known as a choice limiting action under NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. And you want to avoid those things. So the sooner you can make decisions with regard to how you're going to put these funds together, the better off you're going to be as far as ease of administration, ease of implementation down the road. So we have a lot of flexibility on that side. The thing to always understand for HUD, housing tends to be front and center. When you think about sort of the framework of federal programs that are assisting disaster impacted communities, housing is sort of the gap. FEMA was providing what, maximum about $37,000, $38,000 to a household. That doesn't put a house back together. The CDBG DR money does put houses back together. It can fund rehabilitation and repair. It can fund reconstruction, new construction. It can provide funding for multifamily projects, both repair and new construction. It can be focused on public housing, repairs and replacement. But I understand that that's being covered otherwise by the state, I think.
Yeah.
But again, that's something that HUD specifically mentions in its Federal Register notice to make sure that these funds are used to take care of public housing if the need exists. You can provide households with interim mortgage and rental assistance. Again, so if somebody has to vacate their home or is out of their home because it's been damaged being to the point that it's not livable, you can help them with their mortgage payments in the short term, or you can provide rental assistance in the short term. Generally, HUD looks at that for about a maximum of a 36-month period once the grant is made. But again, flexible. You can fund various home buyer counseling and incentive programs, and there's always the opportunity to fund buyouts. And I would say that buyouts are different than acquisition in the regular CDBG program, because the buyout acquisition under the regular program says you can buy it at current fair market value. Well, that doesn't help a homeowner if it's destroyed. So under the buyout provision that HUD creates, what they say is you can figure out what is the most advantageous approach for the property owner and purchase it at, let's say, a pre-storm value. So there are options here to assist households in that manner, and you can align these various incentives in a way to help households recover. Give them a buyout, give them additional housing incentive to help them find as a down payment towards their purchase of a new house somewhere in the area. There are various things to consider about piecing this together.
Stan Holly has a question.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Regarding the buyout, do they look at that post-storm, or do they look at September 27 pre-storm valuation of that property?
Well, the point is, whatever is most advantageous is the option. So if pre-storm value is probably going to be better.
Pre-storm value, I can pretty much guarantee you.
But there are cases where, and I'm sure it's happening out there, that people are bidding properties up, vacant lots and whatnot. And so there's an option here to benefit the property owner.
And in clarification of that, would it be, you're talking a buyout of potential land value versus that with a structure
With
on
the
it pre-storm?
structure, with the structure.
Okay, thank you. My old appraiser hat came on right there.
No, again, the idea is to put the homeowner had equity, and the equity is gone. The idea is to put them back in a position of being able to, move on with their life.
Question. So obviously we have the registry aspect, but once we get that, what's a normal time frame to come up with your action plan? And then obviously the deliverables that you would obviously try to.
Sure.
execute?
We've got a slide, I think. Here we go.
Sorry.
on that.
I'm ahead of that, sorry.
Yeah, and let me be clear that, this may not be as clear as it needs to be, but let me try and redefine it a little bit. So once the register is published in the federal, once the notice is published in the Federal Register, it will say this document is applicable in 5 days, and that plus 5 days from publication, the applicability date is when these timeframes start. So all these are not cumulative. This is all from the applicability date. So within 120 days, the county can submit an action plan to access its administrative funds. Within 60 days, the county needs to submit materials for a financial management certification. That is required. HUD must approve that material and that information prior to being able to make a grant, statutory provision, because this has kind of grown out of a bunch of different inspector general reviews over the years. And so mechanism put in place is to make sure that these policies and procedures are adequate on the front end. About 80 to 85 days from the applicability date, the county will need to have a draft action plan out there and available for 30-day public comment. So 30 days is the minimum of the public comment period. And then the notice will set a standard of submitting that plan within 120 days of the applicability date. And then they have 60 days to review that plan. The action plan is also accompanied by something known as an implementation plan, which addresses capacity, staffing, and coordination efforts. So once the plan once the register notice is put in place, figure plus 4 months to submit to HUD, 2 more months on the back end for HUD to review. So roughly 6 months from the applicability date.
So would it be your opinion, obviously, with the potential 60-day plus delay, we have an opportunity to start our process, to start to move forward with what we'd like to do, to come up with the housing options, to come up with the infrastructure, to try to develop this plan?
Absolutely. It's good runway right now, to be frank. And what we really need to be looking at is the last Federal Register notice that HUD published for this program, which was on January 18th of this year. Last year, HUD put in place a process they called the consolidated notice, where every time they make an allocation, they reissue what is effectively the same notice. They did it last January, they did it in May, they did it again this January. And they'll do it again somewhere in the very near future for this allocation that they just announced about 2 weeks ago. And so we can look at that January 18 document and have a pretty good confidence that that is the roadmap for the money that you have been allocated. And so we can take that and begin to work from that. It may not be absolutely identical, but it's going to be awfully close, is my belief. If they abandon that, they will have abandoned their own, professed reason for having this consolidated notice, which was to speed the process along. So for that reason, I don't think that they'll walk away from what they've been doing over the last 15 months.
Thank you.
Question, if I may? on that?
Sure.
Chair, will you be able to provide us, hopefully with that January 18th letter, so we can have an understanding through our municipalities? Two-part question is also when Deputy Secretary Todman was here, she had indicated that the municipalities as well would need to come up with an action plan. So that would, I assume that that's going to probably be directed through the county for us to provide that.
Yes, great questions. Yes, so the January 18th, I think, is essential. The opportunity we have here is really the runway to try to look at this. We could have great collaboration together. The opportunity is a once in a lifetime, from what I'm told. It's never been given to a county ever. And the challenge is, my understanding is why it wouldn't be given to a county. It's only given to a state because it's hard to claw back the money to the county as we go and allocate it to the cities. If you could imagine, I'm not trying to say anything disrespectful to the county, but we don't have $1.1 billion to claw back. so the opportunity is here, but great question. And it's really for us to understand what each city really needs. And, I look at this as a grant management piece and really a piece for really what I would call management and planning, whether that's repairs, whether that's housing, whether that's infrastructure. So we come up with silos that we look at in a broad sense. We kind of talk about how do we all benefit. If there's silos, we can. And then we look within our own city and we look at those opportunities within the cities. But I would really encourage us in the next 60 days, as we have a running start, to really start to put together, even if they're, just a vague outline of what we look like. This is our opportunity to try to do that. And I think it's really something that we want to do and make sure we put in the silos that we have. There's a need for housing. There's obviously an area for rehabilitation. There's so many infrastructure projects we all have worked collaboratively together on, not only septic to sewer, but just water quality projects in general. So let's just try to take this opportunity to look at those. And the good news of having Hagerty and staff is as we brainstorm, we could give them different information that we require. We received it January 18th. There'll be questions as a result of that. So how do we work together? That's the reason that I just thought it was essential that we work together as a group. You're all going to have individual needs within your cities, and we more than respect that. The job, honestly, is to try to spend the $1.1 billion. I can assure you from what I've been told in the meetings I've been having with people, the challenge is that 70-30, and I think Stan's being very kind, but many times we do go back to HUD because when you cannot utilize the funds, they want us to recover. And if we're in a unique situation where we might need 60-40, those opportunities are here.
And I would add, as we realize, and we had this discussion with Fort Myers Beach and the city of Sanibel, very small, low to mod, but absolutely the most impacted and economically impacted, and also driving force for economic recovery in partnership with the county on getting us back online as well.
So I do have a question, and I've been approached, and I'm trying to understand. We all want you all to participate, but I've been approached several times from CHR. Do you envision the city and CHR working together? Because they've been asking about this, obviously, funding opportunity, and can we help them? And again, I'm trying to make sure we understand the overall community's needs. And I just really wasn't prepared for CHR asking me directly, because I know it's a function the city obviously is very much engaged in.
Yes, so I can easily answer that. When we looked at, when we were sent that list on the housing that came out of the priority list, we looked at that and saw that, a couple of the municipalities, Fort Myers Beach and the city of Sanibel, had not been included, probably because they didn't know what our housing, we had catastrophic impact to our below market rate housing, which is part of our charter. We actually were going to respectfully ask that possibly there's a hold on some of the funds, because we will be looking to grow more. And although our census tract doesn't allow us to in the 70%, what we're going to be providing and looking like all around the county is additional attainable workforce housing for those people that can live and work on our island, be part of our community. So we did direct CHR to make sure that they sent a letter as well to say, you know what, we're here, we need to be considered, because the housing is the most critical impact that we all have throughout the county. So we're going to be working hard to make sure we get additional housing. We're already working on that. And our partnership, as you know, Kevin, Chair, is certainly very strong with CHR.
Listen, we walked into this event on September 28th with a real housing need. This is our opportunity to really address workforce housing. It affects every one of us throughout this. It's great having worked at the city of Sanibel to have our workforce housing, but this is an opportunity for all our cities to think in that silo. This opportunity, it's crippling employment, it's crippling us ability to grow. It's essential. And I certainly know the Senate President is really trying to be very, very helpful, making sure we address housing. So I'd love to see us just in a broad sense and just thoughts of just putting together some ideas of housing repairs, some water quality and start to look at the silos that we have. And we could have a more robust discussion, but housing this opportunity, especially utilizing the hazard mitigation piece where the match can take place, we collectively have almost $1.5 billion worth of funds, which is unheard of in the dollar amount that we have. So I really would like to take advantage of the next 60 days if we all can come back and look at some of the silos that we're in, whether it's repairs, whether it's rebuilding housing options, whether it's septic to sewer, whether it's water quality projects, and start to just envision, even if it's just at the 30,000 foot projects. And just so we have an understanding, because to me, that's like a Surratt environment. We'll have the opportunity to start looking at this globally and exercising these funds. Would that be a fair way to go about this?
Yeah, I would say that there's for local government partners within the county, there's not a need to do a full-blown action plan. What there really is a need to evaluate what your unmet needs are and what are the projects that you potentially have that may meet that need and or be responsive to that need. There's no reason to go through that full action plan process because it's frankly kind of time consuming and it would have to run absolutely in parallel with what the county's doing. So as the notices have been structured in the past, and even the January 18th notice, if there's a sub allocation or working with jurisdictions within the county, no need to have a specific action plan for each jurisdiction. But what you need to do is have that full understanding of what the needs are and what projects may be useful for addressing that need, and then knit them together in a series of programs that could be presented to HUD as this is addressing an unmet need.
So can I, just to follow up, so if I've interpreted what you said correctly, it's really trying to cumulatively understand our unmet needs and then put them together as a cumulative understanding, but we then have an opportunity to deploy and work thereafter. The plan goes in and the implementation is thereafter.
Right. Your big piece of the process here with the plan itself, the action plan, that's the term for it, is to define what those unmet needs are. Looking at the objective data, information collected in the consultation process that you talked about earlier. I can't emphasize how important it is for HUD, from HUD's perspective, that you do thorough consultation throughout the county and different organizations and communities. So you're taking all that information, you're synthesizing it, you're presenting it in the plan as here are what the needs are as a result of the storm. Here are the programs we have that are going to address those needs, and it can include specific projects, or it can say, okay, we're going to run a competitive process for some particular pot of money. There are all kinds of options here that can be deployed for putting that money into the communities. I mean, this is at the discretion of the grantee about how to organize this. So again, you want information in about what those needs are, propose projects about those needs, and you're all going to have to work collaboratively together in order to arrive at a final plan to give the HUD.
For additional context, so for the action plan, this thing's gonna be about this thick. An action plan, we just finished the one for Nebraska for about a quarter amount of money that you are all receiving, and it was 300 plus pages. So the action plan, there's a lot of boxes that need to be checked and things that have to be done. So with the proposal that the commissioner did in the high level, like what are the unmet needs in your communities, you don't need to do the 300 plus page action plan, but identifying what those unmet needs are. And that'd be something that we're going to be doing in the full process for the task force over the year and the development of the plan. The action plan that we end up submitting, that the county ends up submitting at the 120-day mark is not the end all. That's it. I think Stan shared with me that one of the, it was Louisiana is currently on their 75th version of the plan that they submitted to HUD.
What there is an amendment process, and Louisiana post-Katrina has amended it 71 different times because needs change, demand changes. Maybe you didn't get the program right in the first instance, and let's say you don't have uptake on a particular program. Okay, you got $20 million sitting in that program. Nobody's coming for it. You reprogram that money to some other need where you might have other demand or you might have cost overrun. So you're going to amend this plan a lot over time. Don't assume that it's static from the get-go. HUD fully expects that. So you can add things, you can subtract things, you can move money around, but it's a public process so that people understand exactly what you're doing with the money.
We're all going to go back into our communities and cities and come up with a list. Do we have to streamline the process? Are we going to use a standardized form so we don't overcomplicate the request? I think you've stated you just want, what is the project? Make sure it could
Yeah.
qualify, hopefully.
I'll
But so
defer
that we
to
don't-
Tanya on that one.
we're going to have hundreds of these coming in a short period of time. It would be good, it seems like, to have kind of a standardized form so we can kind of go through it.
To be responsive to Commissioner Rain's request for the 30,000 foot level, what we can do is submit, if I'm interpreting it correctly, we can submit out a form to you all just to get an initial idea from you all. So that way we can keep it at that 30,000 level and have that submitted to all of you to get your ideas and have it be brought back to this group.
A good follow-up, and my colleague, former colleague, obviously addressed CHR, and Sanibel had a initiative to try to have 3% of its housing stock, and it was a goal it always had. So is it fair to assume that their expansion in the low to moderate can certainly be within the silo and or any other community that wants to really address workforce housing? Can we utilize this and those opportunities? So I guess my point is, we're not just limited to what's on this piece of paper. As long as we create the workforce housing that we like and it stays within that silo to low to moderate.
That would be correct. You're trying to address, that segment of the population. And so you're looking for any opportunity, again, that you can do that is going to contribute to achieving the overall 70%. And certainly workforce housing, depending on what the eligibility criteria is for that housing, contributes to it. I will make the note that with regard to multifamily property, it's not that every unit must be low mod. It's that, effectively you've got to have 51%, the majority. So you do have some flexibility there. It may affect the contribution to the project, but it's the idea is to have the majority of the units be low and moderate income in a multifamily setting.
Just
Understood.
so,
Thank you.
just for a clarification of that, so if you started a workforce housing project, only 51% of those units have to be qualified to make the entire project qualify under
Yeah.
that 70% silo?
Yeah, and the same holds for infrastructure projects. So if you look at the census data on the map, 51% low moderate area, 51% low moderate income population in the service area for the project gets you 100% credit against the 70%. The credit isn't proportional. It's 100% or zero. That's the way it goes.
Now,
Except for again, on multifamily, there may be some restrictions with regard to percentage.
and with the match, covering the match for the hazard mitigation grants, now, if that's going to someone who is wants to lift their house or somehow harden that house, then you have to look at the income of everybody who's participating in that program to see whether it qualifies or?
If it's a singular house, you're looking at the household.
Okay.
Well, so in this case, it'd be the match for HMGP for their home elevations. So you have to look at
Okay, go ahead.
oh no, that was my question. So if it's the match for the individual household for HMGP, even though it's going through Fort Myers Beach or Cape Coral or Bonita Springs, it would be still calculated at that individual household?
I believe it would be. But
Mr.
we
Chair.
can run that down just to be sure.
Yeah, during our discussion, that your approach with the silos, that was exactly what I was thinking. Once we identify those silos, as you look around this room, many different organizations, many different municipalities have a variety of needs. One particular community may have more of a need than another in comparison to another community. So I think it would be beneficial When you look at our schedule here over the next 12 months, we have a lot to do in 12 months. So I think a lot of our efforts are going to be when we're not meeting. And I know our city, we're developing a team, trying to put a team together to work through this process over the next 12 months. So if we can identify those silos that you had mentioned and kind of put a criteria for each one of those silos, that kind of gives us our homework or our marching orders, for our staff to try to develop that 30,000 foot approach, for our city. Then we'll bring it back to the board, I would assume, to this board, because ultimately this board will make the decision on those items. But I think first we have to gather the information and identify those needs. So we all, number one, can see those needs for each one of our organizations or municipalities. And then we can have a further discussion of what direction we want to go to. That's kind of what I'm hearing out of this discussion. And I just was trying to clarify, is that what your intent is?
That's my intent. I also want everyone to understand that we do have the resources, the ability to do research. As you have additional needs, questions, or things you'd like to research, let's make sure we utilize, the additional staffing we have. I envision some of the projects the county's done where we've utilized that 51% and had the mix of workforce housing and others. There's opportunities with tax credits, there's opportunities with SHIP. So the more we can, literally like structure and level this, the opportunities to try to take a 1.1 to 1.5 to start to have tax credits, to start to do things like that, give us the opportunity for each one of our organizations to address the critical need. And the critical need within our community is workforce housing. Every one of us knows that we have that need. And whether it's on this map right now or not, I really like you to challenge each and every one of you to look at what your city really needs to address the issue that we're talking about. Because again, we have an opportunity with a clean slate of paper to do this. And let's do this. I'd also, we'll look to staff to try to make sure we understand what those tax credits look like, what SHIP is. So we have an opportunity to multi-layer this, because honestly, as you do that, this one point, and it's just something that I'm most comfortable with, as you multi-layer opportunities, funding sources, that you build this amount where we have even further capacity than you could imagine. So, I really know that each one of you, I've had separate conversations about the housing needs and the workforce housing and how each one of our organizations are struggling. This is something where we have this golden opportunity, and let's just work that. But I'd love to start, and we can continue to refine this. Again, the 60 days gives us some running room, not a lot, but it gives us some running room to really start to collaborate. As you feel there's a particular need that you have, feel free to coordinate with Tanya and Terry, because I want to make sure the research that you're looking for, I don't want you to feel like you have to do it yourself. We have the staff, we have the expertise to do that. I want to make sure we encourage that. Thank you.
Go back or.
Clicker stop working. No, backward. Oh, backward working.
Keep going back. Yeah,
I'm back in.
you skipped over a few. Let's talk about some of our other considerations here real quickly. So if FEMA or Army Corps money has been made available or can be made available for the project, then you can't replace that with CDBG DR money. So those things have within the what would be called the waterfall of assistance. They're further up the chain. Use those dollars first before you would think about using CDBG DR. The funds cannot be used for rehab or housing incentives associated with second homes. So that may be an issue in some of your jurisdictions. Again, you can seek waivers and alternative requirements from HUD to address unique circumstances. So again, with that Federal Register notice, what it does is it presents kind of HUD's alternatives to the regular CDBG program. Congress gives them this unique authority to kind of waive provisions of statute and establish alternative requirements. You know, this is Congress giving up a little piece of their authority to executive branch agency, HUD, to say, okay, we're going to bend the statutes a little bit to enhance the disaster recovery goal. And so HUD, what's in the Federal Register notice are all these waivers and alternative requirements that HUD establishes. And you can always go back for other waivers and alternative requirements to fit your own needs. And so as we've talked a little bit about, you know, potential waiver of the overall benefit requirement, the 70% test, something you can ask for. HUD sets out a standard when we can come back to that in a moment. Again, as we noted, you're going to adjust this plan over time. Don't worry about it. You're not alone. Everybody does it. I will say 71 times is a little extreme. 15, 20, 25, not unreasonable over the lifespan of the grant. And HUD emphasizes the need for very close coordination, amongst local governments, with state agencies, and with federal agencies to make sure everything is working together to the best or to the greatest possible extent. So, next steps, again, we await HUD's action on a Federal Register notice. Understand their view of unmet needs and damage. So within the January 18 version of the notice, it lays out a lot of expectations here. But we also, sooner than later, want to get from HUD their explanation with regard to how they arrived at that $963 million in unmet need, and understand that breakout of what was attributable to housing, what was attributable to infrastructure, and what was attributable to economic revitalization needs. So HUD will provide that briefing upon request. So we need to make sure we get that set up sooner than later to help inform the conversation going forward. So we want to accelerate the development of the action plan if at all possible. So already efforts going forward to do the necessary consultation. You need to initiate the unmet needs assessment. There's also a mitigation needs assessment that needs to be done. That kind of speaks to that 144 million add-on for mitigation purposes. Determine what the funding relationship is going to be between the county and the local governments within the county, exactly how that's going to work. Again, I think that is going to be left to your own devices to figure that out. I don't believe HUD is going to dictate that. It would be out of character, no precedent for that. As best I can remember, and looking backwards, I can't see anything. You want to look at this broad scope of programs that can address the various needs that you have along the lines of housing and infrastructure, mitigation, public services, and just whatever other activities and needs you think you have. Again, there's flexibility here to design programs if need be that fit your specific needs. Again, need to consider exactly what it is that you need. It involves a lot of talking at the local level on what those needs are. So other than the administrative funding that we talked about earlier, the action plan has to be submitted to and approved by HUD before you can access that DR funding. So again, if it's 120 days after the applicability date of the notice, and then HUD's got it for submission, and then 60 days for HUD to review, that's 180 days. That's 6 months from the applicability date of the notice. So that's going to put us on a front time frame, even if this notice comes out sometime, let's say April 30th. You got to add 6 months onto that. You're not going to see a dollar of it really until late in the year or first quarter of next year. That's a reality, unless there's some way to really expedite the preparation of the action plan. And there is an opportunity. Again, you've got some runway in the short term. Maybe you can get ahead of the curve. Did we finish on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's been a bit of a question posed with regard to, how do you go about waiving this 70% standard? And Again, HUD has done it in the past in some instances, very limited number. And what HUD does now in the Federal Register notice is it defines what its criteria are for considering that waiver. And they've got 5 points here. Rather than read the first several, I would focus on D and E because they're really where the hurdle gets erected. And so what they're saying is that you're able to demonstrate how low and moderate income persons' disaster-related needs have been sufficiently met, and that the needs of non-low mod persons or areas are disproportionately greater, and that you have the jurisdiction lacks the resources to assist the non-low mod population. So there's a hurdle that you have to explain to HUD why you can't meet the low mod test and why the other needs are greater. You may well have a good argument, given the nature of the population of the areas that were most directly impacted by the effects of the storm. But you've got to go through an analysis process and be prepared to make that point to HUD. Then HUD has to make that determination that there's a compelling need, and HUD gets to define what's compelling. Compelling need to lower the percentage of the grant. There may be other opportunities to work around this a little bit before you go sort of frontal on at the 70% test. Maybe you look at altering or asking HUD to alter, what is a low mod person? Maybe you want to bump that from 80% of area median income. Maybe you ask for 120%. Makes a difference. Maybe you ask to exclude certain activities from the calculation. That was done before in Mississippi after Katrina. So you can think about ways to manage this that may not necessarily be taking this on head first at the get-go. But again, the mechanism exists. It's been done before, but the bar is significant. So you do have the list of housing projects that have been put forward at this point. So it's an extensive list. That's good in the sense of, anyone involved in real estate development over time will tell you not everything pans out. So it's good to have a deep bench of potential projects for consideration. Is there anything that's missing from this list? Other opportunities to be addressed within that list. So I think this is a bit of an opportunity for an open discussion, for you at this point. And so I'd like to hear from the group, I suppose.
Chair?
Sure.
Yeah, when I look at this list, of course, we did look through it, and I know a lot of these were already in the pipeline. And first, I want to say, I understand that the housing all over the county helps our municipalities as well that were hit, because we know many drive from those areas, and they need to choose to live where they want to live, and that might not be necessarily within our borders. When I look at the housing, we would say, okay, it's what I'm understanding is this is still a very living document. So we want to come back and have the opportunity to add on some of the below market rate housing, attainable housing that Sanibel is looking to put in the pipeline. So that I hope will be up for discussion as we look forward to that. I've just learned a lot in your presentation, and I think that would essentially affect Fort Myers Beach as well, because I'm not sure that you have any projects on here either under this list.
Well, we have some projects we're considering. Of course, we don't have much in the way of land, undeveloped land left. We definitely have some projects we're considering. And from what I understand the conversation, the any project that we put forward that satisfies the 70% would have a better chance of being funded through the organization, just because that's a bit of that's a constraint.
With that, though, there's that other 30%, which is what I think, some of us are going to have to be looking at as well. So, we will bring forward some of the proposed projects, some of the areas that, some of ours were already totaled that we'll be working on that might come under, as you do it as a global ask, those might be bundled in like a mortgage, when you're selling a mortgage, if those can be part of the greater ask, and that'll be for what we'll need to find out.
And sorry, Chair.
Good, no, by all means.
And I think too that, we're working on right now our comprehensive plan and coming up with like incentives for bonus densities, et cetera, for workforce housing. That may also be a way to leverage that now to get more workforce housing for the dollar by including some of these other incentives.
I'm also hopeful that in planning, building, and capacity, many of our plans allow additional density when it comes to workforce housing, mixed use. So what may not exist today, you need to look within your own city to see what opportunities there are. Because right now, while we have the rebuilding process, there's a time to really start to become creative in the way that we didn't think about. Listen, I have 2 places that I've governed, but certainly understood the Sanibel plan well enough and Lee County's plan, where we have opportunities within the land development code when it specifically talks about housing, especially workforce housing, where some of our density requirements certainly can be expanded and/or mixed use, use. So this is where we have that opportunity to think about, and really try to take advantage of this situation. I hope that we're able to come up with lists and leverage not only this funding, hazard mitigation, tax credits, multi-use, where we have part of it is workforce housing, part of it is developer, where you have that PBP. The more we could stretch that dollar, we're going to address an issue that we all knew was so vital to this community, which is workforce housing. So I'm really hopeful that that branch gets to interact with our branch. We start to think about those ways, but you all know your community better than anyone else. And it's really the opportunity to try to start this task of what does the 30,000 foot look like? What are your thoughts? And let's start to collaborate together. I'm looking forward to the opportunities in front of us. And I want to make sure we utilize these funds, and I have 4 other commissioners to work with, but utilize the funds in the most efficient way that we achieve the most housing that we possibly have within the county, however that is. And I challenge each and every one of you to look at your workforce housing. And if you don't have that option, if now's the time to expand upon it and really provide the housing that's necessary for some of the people that do so much for us. And most of those people, during, as I learned, lost their houses, from our police force, to our teachers. I met a Sanibel teacher that lost her house on Sanibel. And, so those are the opportunities that we look to. And I look forward to working with this group and those silos. Really do.
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Just, I kind of look at this workforce housing as a collaborative effort regionally. It's not a city issue. If I look at Sanibel, you probably don't have much land there for workforce housing, but other areas of Lee County have those areas, and that's, I guess this group has to then start to focus it. Where's that the best location for that? We don't want to stick it way out east when everybody's got to come west to service the needs in there. So, I probably need a little help on understanding the rules and regulations about workforce housing. How do I get that started, at least for a discussion? So if somebody could help give me information on that would be beneficial to at least explore and get a discussion going. Is there possibilities in some limited space that we have left, even in Estero? We don't have a lot of place to do it, but there are niches, and I think we could look at land use codes and say, how do we do that? Obviously, there's public opinion on that we have to look at too, but I'd like to get some more information on that.
So John, great question. And both yourself and Bill, are new. So there was a briefing. There's an opportunity to interact with both Terry and Tanya. So we'll have that opportunity to make sure you're up to speed in that regard. So we want to make sure you're able to do that. Thank you. Ma'am.
Thank you, sir. And John, so the city of Sanibel, the only exemption that we have for density is to allow an increase in density for workforce or retainable housing. We call it our below market rate housing. So I'm happy to send that out to all of the municipalities through the chair. So you can see what we did a long time ago, because we are looking at more land to accommodate. We have a 3% cap, we might want to look at that. Is that enough? And we are already looking at mixed use incentives, increased density for commercial redevelopment for the purposes of workforce housing. It's very specific. We're very cautious in what our Sanibel plan is and staying true to that. But we've already made those accommodations because we do understand the importance of making sure that you can live and work and play in the same place that you're striving to be a part of the community. It makes a difference. So I'll get that through to you, sir, and you can pass that through.
Terry
Okay.
and Tanya would be great.
Thank you.
And Chair, just a point to John, I think that there's definitely a balancing act that I think we understand that Sanibel and Fort Myers Beach is not the most financially, efficient way to create workforce housing. But then we have other limitations like traffic and the demographic makeup of our communities. So the closer you can put the people to where they work, then you reduce the demands on traffic and other infrastructure.
That's why I guess I earlier mentioned, the flexibility you have in land development code. Certainly, Holly really gave a great explanation, and it's really what comes to my mind. But as we look at within Lee County and the opportunities we have, it really does, the only provision really that we have the flexibility is when it comes to workforce housing. So we do have a lot of flexibility you might not necessarily realize.
All right, excellent. So kind of for this slide, based off of the conversation today, what we'll do is that we'll put together a form to submit to all of you to identify both housing infrastructure mitigation, economic development, direct community services, the whole spectrum of CDBG-DR, of what are projects and unmet needs that you have identified within your jurisdiction or within the areas that you work, and be able to submit that to this group so that we can start compiling a list for the group to review. So we'll have that form out to you all and within the week so that we can start collecting that information so we can review it at the next Recovery Task Force meeting. Is that an accurate interpretation of the discussion today?
So if you can send this PowerPoint to everybody, that would be
Definitely.
great.
All right, and we'll put some questions in there just to kind of see, is this in the 70% bucket? Is this potentially in the 30% bucket? Which the silos has it in, so that we can start puzzle piecing this together. Any other comments with regards to community development block grants, disaster recovery? All right, well, thank you so much, Stan, for the presentation. And I will kick it on over to Terry.
Great. Thank you. That was a great conversation to start our focus on the branches. As you're aware, there are 8 branches that support the work of the Recovery Task Force. They have begun meeting this past week after they were formally organized based on the February 27th meeting of this body. And they've gone through the County Board of Commissioners appointing process. In keeping with Commissioner Ruane's guidance, we're looking at the 30,000 foot level for the initial presentation of priorities. And so this is a summary. Again, it'll be in your deck and the materials posted online. What we're looking for here is your general sense if these are directionally right, if you see a gap or an omission that we need to bring back to the branches. The branches will be meeting initially once a month, March, April, May, and then they will increase their pace to 2 meetings a month to begin working on actual action plans, July, August, September. June, July, August, September. So for the planning and capacity branch, that really sets the framework for a lot of the deliberations. There is a discussion about the improved response short-term, immediately after a disaster, a recognition of the need for increased intergovernmental coordination for this long-term planning. This was just emphasized in the conversation that you had about bringing all of these strands of work together around housing as a good example. And then using the established planning community areas to be able to focus on the identification of priorities within those areas. And I think to Holly, your point about making sure that there is representation across the communities for the needs that are expressed. So that's planning and capacity. Anything stand out that's a missing piece? Economic recovery, they're looking at what are the partnerships and incentives to support workforce. There was a clear theme that workforce is the lifeblood of the county. And without it, everything else stalls or stagnates. So there's a strong appreciation there. Looking at the need, building off of the issue that you identified at the first meeting about the access to rapid financing. The SBA loan process is a slower process. And so what are the mechanisms to inject capital immediately, as well as to a idea to continue the push for marketing so that people don't move on from this area and fall in love with some other place, but in fact, they keep their close connections here. There is a lot here, and want to make sure that that is being reflected in marketing efforts for our tourism-based economy. There's an appreciation with the rebuild that the vital role that natural resources play to make sure that there's even more public access where that's possible, to make that attractive and a great asset to leverage. And then the final point being on identifying additional industry sectors to grow so that it's a more resilient economy, that you can't knock one pillar out from under it and the entire economy crumbles. So being intentional about building out other sectors. Other thoughts on the economic recovery? Education and workforce is probably one of our strongest suits here because of the longstanding work of Future Makers Coalition. And in this regard, there is already a consensus in the region for workforce participation to increase the skilled and credentialed workers. There's work underway, there are pipelines, there's programs, there's partnerships with institutions of higher education, with the Lee County School District. All of this is in place, more than shovel ready. It's been working actively. So how to create and partner and leverage more resources in this regard to improve the outcomes, beginning as early as early childhood education through career education. Supporting the further development of those lifelong learning and training opportunities for all, particularly as we diversify the industry sectors so that individuals can ladder up in their careers and move to higher levels of personal and household income. And then looking at these outside variables that are all interconnected, as you comment on with the housing, the bottlenecks for transportation, the lack of housing affordability, mental health care was raised up, as well as just child care, so individuals can get their education and go to work. Any questions on this one? Health and social services. There were a lot of lessons learned as a result of the hurricane, weaknesses within the system, strengths within that. So understanding the need to be more prepared for mobile services, and especially to meet special needs environments and populations. This was true with the shelters and facilities, access to pharmacies and mental health services, to build that out in a more robust manner. We have a great team for this branch that brings a lot of great ideas and resources. Building on the idea of needing a resilience hub, where there is increased access to dependable real-time information during and immediately after the disaster when other lines of communication are down, and looking to then do a prior mapping, something we can do now in anticipation of a future disaster, about this critical care infrastructure, be it group homes, be it urgent care facilities, mental health facilities and all that, to make sure that that is contributed into the emergency management center and their information. So we have that. And then finally, an emphasis on the mental health responses and anticipating the window we're in with mental health challenges, and then from experience from other communities as we approach a 1-year anniversary, that there will be a spike in the need there. So can we be prepared? This is almost an emergent need. This will happen before the plan itself is finalized and recommended to the Board of County Commissioners. Any thoughts there? Okay. Infrastructure. Here, they were looking at the regulatory requirements for special services and supporting. Oh, sorry, that's back to, I flipped the page, but that was back to the other one. And then, so infrastructure. I think we've learned a lot about what needs to be preserved and hardened for the critical infrastructure: water, power, transportation, communications, our sanitary systems. For that, I think as part of your lists and the connection of the HUD funding with infrastructure, to be identifying needs that you have in your communities. The pre-disaster planning for supplies to shelters, particularly identifying special needs shelters, fuel stockpiles, and then understanding that there was a cascading of points of failure and how to moderate those weaker links. Identifying these shelter needs and the tension between schools needing to restart to give a sense of normalcy and to enable parents to go back to work while students are going to school. So how do we accommodate that and the pressures to deliver on the emergency shelter needs of residents who are displaced? And then looking at opportunities for redundancy in the infrastructure and systems and partnerships, and how can we share assets across jurisdictions in the outside areas where systems can be turned over to operations outside. We have that well orchestrated, for instance, with the repair and rebuild of the electrical systems, but are there other systems that we can tap into for that? And then big picture is, how do these improvements increase the livability of our region for all residents? Thoughts there? For housing, it goes right to the heart of what you were just talking about. And there we've got a lot of important interest from builders, developers, planners, all coming together, looking at, are there ways of reducing the cost of housing to make the construction more affordable? Where are the opportunities to create consistency of codes and permitting? This isn't only about the dollar cost, but it's also about the development time, to shorten that, because time is money in this case. So how to reduce the time it takes from submitting that first plan to getting the approval and breaking ground. So there are plenty of ways to look at there. You've touched on the zoning changes so that there can be consideration of density and redevelopment of, say, existing properties, looking at shopping centers and other things that may be repurposed. And then looking at the issue of housing and development incentives for vulnerable low-income populations and communities. So issues that you've covered very well in the conversation we just had. For natural resources, there were a set of regulatory issues and actions and incentives to address the impacts on the natural resources. taking direct actions to improve our hydrological and ecological conditions, and then a recognition of the need for a specific public education and awareness campaign to reduce this. The example there being the fertilizing restrictions and all of that to cut that down. So behind each of these, there were dozens of ideas from each branch, but this is rolling them all up to the 30,000 foot level. And then the last branch, cultural, they're looking at recovery and stabilization of the arts community and organizations. They're hard hit coming right after 2 years of being closed essentially because of the pandemic, and then a natural disaster on top of that. It's really exhausted the financial resources, human resources of a lot of our arts organizations. And they're feel like, they're on critical life support in a number of cases, and what special provisions could be made for the arts community and supporting the cultural facilities and individual artists that are very vital to a thriving community. And then an emphasis on a regional approach to cultural planning, and then more representation for the arts stakeholders and interests in our decision-making here. So it's a high-level summary. Further thoughts. We'll also have a window of time, about a week, for other feedback on the plans that Tanya is going to share. So if this sparks something, or you have conversations back with your peers, and then you want to add direction, and we're looking directionally, are we going right? And then the branches will begin to flesh out specific action plans. We will gain broad-based public information from our next step of community engagement that Tanya will cover.
All right, I'll try to be quick. So within your packet is the community engagement plan. We would like your feedback on this. If you can send it to the info@resiliently.org email within a week after this meeting, because we, with CDBGDR, as Stan has said, engaging with the community, getting that, consulting with the community, getting the feedback on what they're viewing their unmet needs are, identifying what their priorities are, is going to be very significant. And the engagement strategy is, I already told the team that you're not sleeping much for the next month. So with that, it's going to kick off with the on the table sessions. So we definitely need your points of contact to who we should be coordinating with. So appreciate you guys filling out the sign-in sheet for the on the table sessions, which will kick off the community engagement efforts. We are then going to be doing a aggressive town hall meeting strategy throughout the month of April. Probably the latter half of April, we're working on identifying locations. We would love your input if you would like to host. We're talking a lot of people. So rooms that can hold upwards to 100 to 200 individuals that have the required technology for those types of meetings. We would love to be able to lock down the dates within the document on page 3. We've identified that a town hall per municipality, and then we started grouping the unincorporated areas to be able to identify other town hall areas so that there's accessibility for the entire population. This is not written in stone. Please provide feedback if you think that other areas are not represented or could be grouped in here to do these town halls. Town hall meetings will be very interactive, very little espousing, more collecting of information from the community, explaining what is being done as part of the recovery task force and the recovery and resilience plan effort. What does the overall recovery efforts look like? But then collecting that information through cell phone texting group. Looking at these different applications that can in live time take that input from the community, but then also set them loose and have stations that are along the themes of the different branches, where we're going to have a small sea of post-it notes where they're able to put their input, and we can collect that information for that community engagement and be able to document their input for the different issues that the community is facing. And prompting them in certain areas, but then also providing enough open forum for them to bring up issues that are not represented in those topics. So there's going to be a significant amount of engagement into informing the community of these town halls. We're coordinating with the public information officer for the county, and she has a very strong network with all of your municipalities. So we'll be working with all of the community and trying to get the word out. So once we have a final schedule, we'll be pushing that information out very, very thoroughly. Appreciate all of you guys' support and sending that out to your networks and through the different avenues that you have. So town halls. So right now we're looking at 15 locations throughout, and again, trying to get this as much done in latter half of April, maybe early, go into a little bit into early May. But in order for us to hit the different milestones that we have in developing the recovery and resilience plan, as well as the action plan for the CDB GDR effort, it's going to be a little bit of a sprint for the next couple months. Then going into, well, any questions about the town halls before I go into the workshops? Yes, ma'am.
I do. Thank you. My assumption is, will you want us to help moderate those? Do you just want us to get the location and you will help us put together that whole formula of what's happening? And the chair will be there as well. Just trying to see how you want us to help facilitate that and what part we'll play or won't play when you come to our community.
That is completely up to you all
Okay.
in terms of your level of involvement with the town halls. We know that you all have a very full plate with everything, but if you would like to be part of the moderating and introduction of the town hall, the intent, and speak to that, we can work with each of you. If you'd like to be the host in identifying the location, and as well as the sharing the information with your public. So as much as you'd like to be involved, we would love as much participation as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for town halls? Yes, sir.
How flexible are you on the type of space? Because we've had most of the town hall right now is in trailers on Fort Myers Beach.
If then we'll be in trailers. So whichever space that you think is able to take in that population, or we can potentially facilitate outside and just get creative. But we can be as creative as we need to be.
Okay, well,
We'll talk. Yeah. All right. So workshops. This is where we will be engaging the subject matter experts, the community stakeholders, nonprofits that are working in this area, the city, the municipal, and county staff that work in this day in, day out, and doing workshops and inviting them. Participation is completely voluntary, but asking for them to engage with the branch members to be able to identify best practices. What has worked in the past? What were the hurdles in the past to different solutions that were implemented? What has been tried and didn't work? But being able to bring that institutional knowledge of the community to the branch members so they are able to take in that input from the subject matter experts and answer their questions. It's going to be kind of a free-form a guided, facilitated discussion between the branch members and these subject matter experts on different topics to start looking at, okay, further refine the priorities, but then what are potential solutions to the problems that have been identified. And there'll be, the idea with the workshops is there are some of the issues and the priorities that the branches have identified that are very much dependent on each other, that the infrastructure and natural resources branches may identify a significant priority that overlaps between the two branches. So we're taking the priorities that have been developed for the last 2 weeks and then finding where those entanglements exist. And then we'll be scheduling the workshops. This will probably, again, being later half of April and early May, and inviting folks to come to a workshop to be able to discuss these issues and better inform the branches so that they may identify holistic solutions for the priorities that they had identified. So we'll be working with the branches to identify who those subject matter experts are, and working with you all and seeing if your staff is able to participate in these workshops, who would be the best individuals to come to them to address these issues and inform the branch members. And then we'll send out invitations to everybody so that they have visibility. Any questions about the workshops? All in that continuous public messaging. We have an Instagram account now. So being on social media, working with the communications leads in each of your jurisdictions to pump out the constant content to the community so they have visibility on what is going on. And then informing them of the different community engagement opportunities. And here are the meetings. And I'll turn it over to Terry.
Yeah, one of the benefits that we've had with the broad-based engagement here is I want to thank Ben Siegel of the Port Authority and also Vicki Moreland, who had produced the images here at the airport. So if you're flying in and out in the next couple of weeks, we've started to get a public awareness of the Resilient Lee Recovery Task Force work. And then the next slide, we've got a specific set of slides with the QR codes for people to get more information about On the Table and to be able to register for that. So we have a generous offer to be able to continue to provide public information through this vehicle at our airport.
So with the community engagement plan, we will submit it out in its entirety. Look forward to your feedback and also working with each of you to see if you have locations that you would like to host the town hall, what a level of involvement that you're able to put forward. And then also, do we have the right areas? Is there any area that's missing that you're seeing within that list that we should be focusing on? And just appreciate if we can get that feedback by the 31st, because we got to continue to run. I don't want to say start. Before I jump into the project management plan, I just wanted to highlight one other document that you have is the emergent issues. So during our last recovery task force meeting, both the chair and Councilman Corey identified two emergent issues that wanted to be addressed. One of them was with regards to the SBA business loans. And we were able to collect some data from SBA directly with regards to the status of the loans. There have been payouts, approximately $6.9 million for businesses. However, there is a significant amount of applications in process still. And speaking with SBA, the feedback was that the application process and the documentation needed is significant for the larger awards for the business loans, and that is where the from their perspective, that is where the slowdown in the payouts are occurring, is that the documentation has not been submitted. So in identifying potential ways to resolve this, SBA can provide site assistance and do train the trainer and provide training to the community on the process so that different entities can be force multipliers and educating. Another option is that SBA is at the disaster recovery centers currently, the DRCs. So directing the populations to those where the SBA can look at their individual applications and work with them on a one-on-one basis. But then also another option is asking SBA to come and brief on this task force, brief the task force on where they are at and be able to problem solve with you on any other solutions. So I just put that forward to you all in terms of if there's anything that you would like to be done to address this issue.
I just wonder if you can make an inquiry as to, I was just wondering if you could make an inquiry with the SBA to see if they would be willing to utilize some of the ways in which, PPP loans were provided during the pandemic. As I understand it, basically people could go into the banks and apply for those loans, which would then be funded by the PPP programs and so forth, as opposed to the feds trying to do it themselves, working with businesses. So is there a way to use the pandemic experience in supporting business to get the money to our business community quicker?
That might be a challenge. An alternative one might consider is that SBA goes through a participating bank that's qualified. And those participating banks are generally have gone through the vetting process. Some of the criticism of PPP, there were a lot of banks that weren't necessarily SBA preferred. And obviously there was money that didn't get dispensed properly. So I think a unified ask is to allow the SBA channel and the SBA banks that are approved to be that funnel for us. I think that would be more received as we lobby our legislators for that action. I've certainly talked with Senator Rubio for the PPP, and some of the challenges with the PPP was just the administration for people didn't work within the system. So I think if we can narrow our focus to SBA providers, that might help our businesses recover quicker, as well as not ask for something that aren't approved vendors. That would be my only modification.
So in terms of next steps, drafting a letter on behalf of the Recovery Task Force and to advocate for this position and submitting it to the delegation as well as SBA. Is that an amenable next step?
The delegation, our senators, and yeah, that would be great.
Sounds great. The second emergent issue is with regards to the disaster loss claim for tax returns. There has been steps in terms of the Senators Scott and Rubio have introduced a bill for the Tax Relief Act that is also being supported on the House as well to enact the legislation. There is a longer, more difficult route for them to claim with the major disaster declaration, but that will make it the acts that the senators are doing are going to make it easier for staff to be able to, or not staff, the general public to be able to claim these costs on their taxes in the for last year. So it seems that is moving forward with the actions by the senators. Is there any other action that the Recovery Task Force would like to take in terms of this emergent issue? Hearing none. All right. Excellent. All right. And then just as an accountability for us, I am not going to read this to spare you all. But if you are curious what we are doing in the background, this is a document that is going to guide the different actions that the branches and then the deliverables that they need to produce each month, and what is the task force support team doing, what are the different timelines that we are operating under. But it is a pretty extensive and detailed document in terms of exactly what we'll be doing over the next for the remainder of the year, but our deadlines of what we need to do in order to support you all and the branches as well. So good bedtime reading. Any feedback in terms of these, please, or any questions, please email the info@resiliently.org email, and we'll incorporate that feedback. All right, Terry.
Great, thank you. Just to summarize next steps here for that, we had sent around the sign-up sheet for the on the table points of contact. For that, we'll be asking you for locations for the town halls and any review of the project management plan, the community engagement plan, and then the initial branch priorities. We're joined by two of the branch leads. We have Dan DeLisi still here, and then Sandy Stillwell Youngquist had been here as well. The branch leads are playing an important role to guide this work, and appreciate their hard work on behalf of the Recovery Task Force for that. So any questions about what will be happening next? Okay, very good. Then, as you can see, there are two down, several to go. Looks like the timing of the HUD application is going to coincide pretty closely with when this process runs its course, which I think is a good thing, so that these will be tightly reconciled and connected together. So any final questions before we move to public comment?
Chair?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I apologize for being late. I am the president of the Horizon Foundation, and I know the Horizon Council is a big part. It's for the business recovery. So there are a couple of conflicting dates, but I will Zoom in my car as I did today. I just briefly go to recognize the meeting. So I apologize in advance, but I will be getting in my car and getting here. Hopefully I can beat that 2 minutes that I almost beat today. So thank you for your patience, everyone.
No worries. Thank you for coming. I'll open up to public comment. Anyone from the public? Just feel free to raise your hand. And I'll stay after, and I'm sure some of the members will, if there's any one-on-one questions you might have. I suggest everyone really start to look at, as this website continues to build, this presentation. I'll make sure that everyone on the task force receives the PowerPoint, but we'll continue to make sure the website is updated. It's going to be a very robust website, and I encourage you all to do that. If there's any inquiries, feel free to use the info at resiliently.com.org, to actually facilitate and talk to us. But anytime there's ever any question or direction, feel free to contact anyone on this task force, as well as myself. So I appreciate everyone's attendance and engagement. I look forward to obviously helping and you all working together to